I'm Chris, and this is my lovely wife, Crystal. We planted Redeemer 5 years ago. Neither Crystal or I grew up in a Christian home, and just to see the way the Lord grabbed both of us while we were college students in Springfield, Missouri, at what's now called Missouri State University. The Lord grabbed a hold of us there, brought us into His story, and He's been working graciously in and through our lives ever since. We first kind of experienced a call, first, I guess, to college ministry. Where we served at the school that we both graduated from for 7 years. A variety of circumstances led us to move after about 7 years there to come to Bloomington and work with a sister ministry on the campus of IU. And really, even in that time when we started moving here, we started kind of feeling like a little bit of these thoughts about what about church planting. So after we got to Bloomington, I think Crystal and I both would agree that we kind of had a little bit of a gospel awakening that sort of began shortly after we arrived here, where just kind of coming awake to the gospel is more than simply just an entry point to the faith, but really the entirety of our faith, that the gospel is what moves us, what grows us, what continues to bear the fruit of faith and obedience in our lives. And also just a greater appreciation in the scriptures for just the centrality of the local church to God's mission. And simultaneously, as we're kind of experiencing this awakening to that, we've been doing college ministry for 8, 9, 10 years at this point, and we're seeing students a few years after they've graduated, some of them thriving, doing really well, but a number of students who just simply were struggling to connect with local churches, really didn't seem to know how to be a part of the local church. Also, our kids were starting to get older. Seth and Leah were 3 and 1 when we moved to Bloomington, but they started getting into school, and we started meeting teachers and other parents. And so not everybody that fits this 18 to 22-year-old paradigm of college ministry age group to where, there's a lot of other people in this city who need the gospel, who need community. And we really just began to feel like God was stirring in us this desire to plant a church, to be a gospel-centered community on mission that would help equip college students to know how to be a vibrant member of a local church. And then also we would be able to plant this church that would be able to reach the people of Bloomington, people who weren't 18 to 22, who didn't know the Lord, who needed community, who needed, most importantly, to meet Jesus and know Him in saving faith. And by God's grace, we started moving forward in this call to plant. We started wrestling through this probably around 2010, really started talking with friends and other folks about this, began to get all kinds of equipping, going down to Sojourn's pastor school for a whole year, doing some other things, the Porterbrook training, trying to just grow, get as much equipping as I could as I kind of started to discern this call to plant this church. And I remember just even some old friends from Missouri coming to see us, Seth and Jessica Goodrich, some of the first supporters of our church, literally, because we shared with them that we were getting ready to go get assessed. And as they left our house, Seth left us a check to cover the cost of our assessment. Just beautiful signs, just evidences of grace that was just kind of encouraging us to walk in this path. And then, we go through assessment with Acts 29 Network. We get approved to kind of move forward in this. And just to see God's gracious provision of people who really felt a call to be a part of this church, who were wanting this here in our city. It was just a beautiful, beautiful evidence that God was with us and leading us in this. And really, as we started to get going, I think one of the things we realized that maybe was a little bit of a surprise was just how much we needed this community.
Yeah, definitely. I had no idea how much we needed the community, especially how much we needed to have deep friends that love the Lord, who would be willing to point us to the gospel, especially during the process of church planting. Through the community, really began to realize that the Lord was really drawing me closer to Himself and making me more like Him, as I was seeing people really get what it's like to do life together and be in church together to really be a family.
By God's grace, we moved forward and gathering kind of a launch team, and the initial members of that kind of group that was going to help plant Redeemer, we began meeting in January of 2012. Right here in this very room. There's some different furniture then, but we were right here together, and so this is kind of the very beginnings of our church. Is in the living room we sat in, most days. At some point we're here, and just to think about just the people that God brought at the very beginning to kind of start that. And by God's grace, we didn't get to stay long in our living room because within a couple weeks we were kind of getting to where it was getting a little crowded in here.
Looking back, it's pretty amazing how much God has done through Redeemer in my life these past 5 years. When I came to Bloomington, fresh out of undergrad, I'd gone through a lot of church hurt. But when we first visited Redeemer back in July, before the launch even, the people were just so welcoming. Crystal Jones came right down and gave us a big hug, and we never met her in her life. And we met all sorts of people who just wanted to take us out to coffee and just establish community right away. It was unlike anything I'd experienced in church so far.
So we moved the church out of my living room and into the warehouse, a community center on South Rogers. The owner-operator of the warehouse kind of lives up the street from me, and he graciously allowed us to use some office space that was used by a couple different Christian ministries here in town for free on Sunday afternoons at 4 p.m. And so we started gathering there Sundays at 4, probably about February of 2012. And we started just kind of gathering together to just kind of build this DNA into a church, to really seek to be a gospel-centered community on mission, just kind of centered around the passage in Acts 2, verses 42 through 47, which reads, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers, and awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." And so that's what we sought to be. We sought to be this church that's really devoted to the gospel, devoted to the gospel word, the Bible. And by God's grace, the Lord started growing this little body, started bringing other folks in who were looking for community, looking for the gospel. We celebrated some baptisms in at the end of that spring semester. And so already, even before we had started this church, we were seeing the fruit of people, at least giving proclamation to the faith that they already had, or coming to faith in Christ, and really kind of just joining the mission of taking the gospel to our city.
Hey Redeemer, my name is Justin Keene, and my wife and I lived in Bloomington from 2009 until 2013. And I was doing grad school at IU as well as Johanna. And so our experience was that we moved to Bloomington and there was not really a church for us that fit. And so what ended up happening actually was that we were driving an hour north to southern Indianapolis to go to a church there that was an Acts 29 plant. And we were doing that on Sunday mornings and then again during the week for small groups. And it was just really wearing on us. And eventually I got this email. I'll never forget it. It changed my life. I got this email from a random guy named Chris Jones. And it just said, "Hey, you don't know me, but I got your name from some Acts 29 guys here in Indiana. And I am thinking about planting a church in Bloomington. Would you want to have dinner?" And I said, yes, like almost immediately. And so we met up and just loved the vision and the idea of a church intended to be gospel-centered and missional and to go out and seek the lost in our city. And so just joined in. We were a part of it from meeting in Chris and Crystal's living room all the way to the warehouse for core group stuff to Banneker. And towards the end of the church's time at Banneker was actually when we moved. Since then, we've continued to pray and love you guys. We're so thankful that the church has continued, that it has grown, that it is healthy and vibrant, and that the lost in the city are getting the gospel regularly preached to them through you guys. And so I want to say thank you for continuing to be faithful to God's call to the city. I love you guys. I'm so happy that this church has continued to grow and to mature, and that there are elders now and there are deacons and all of these things that are evidence of God working through you for the sake of the good of the city that you are in.
Well, as we were getting ready to kind of start public worship, we'd been meeting at the warehouse for all the launch team stuff, and we even started to do some worship and then started a couple community groups in the summer. But we needed a space where we could gather for worship on a Sunday morning. And I wasn't really sure where we were going to go. But again, it's another one of those providences and provisions of by God's grace. Tim and Jesse Pritchett were hanging out with us, and Tim had worked at this place called the Banneker Center back in the day, and we had great connections with the folks who were in charge here at that time, and so Tim just really connected us with this place here in the near West Side neighborhood, the Banneker Community Center. And it's close to downtown. We definitely wanted to have a place where we could be kind of close to the center of our city, close to campus as much as we possibly could. There's just not much of a gospel presence in our city downtown, and we really wanted to hopefully kind of change that by being at least closer to that area. But yeah, this gave us a place where we could start meeting Sundays at 10 a.m. We moved in here in the start of August, kind of getting ready for our public launch, if you will, whatever that means, on September 9th of 2012. And my daughter got baptized right up here in a really tiny horse trough, a much smaller version of the one we use now. So a lot of sweet memories just being here and kind of the initial stages where God just kind of grew our church. I mean, God was so good to us, even providing us with the space through Tim's connection, but also just providing us with the stuff that we needed. Like, I remember, connecting with our brother Kevin Galloway and his church up in Michigan City, Indiana. And they had all this random sound gear from an old building that they were moving out of. And so Justin Keene and I drove up, picked up a bunch of free sound stuff. I mean, the biggest speakers in the world that were so way bigger than anything we needed, which made for, heavy hauling, but they were free, so they were the right price. Picked up a bunch of free chairs that we had to spray paint. Yeah, just all sorts of things that we slowly kind of had to get and acquire, and God just provided. So gathering in a gym in a community center means that a lot of things have to happen to turn it into a gathering space for a church on Sundays, especially when we decided to turn the gym this way. You'll notice behind me the Jared Jeffries sign, and we did not want to be known as the Jared Jeffries Church, so that meant we had to get some pipe and drape to kind of hide that, kind of clean it up a little bit in here. We obviously needed to set up chairs every week. We had to haul in all the sound gear, set that up, set up the band, set up a screen and a projector so we could kind of see what was, people could see the words and know what's going on. Making coffee and all those kind of things that we take for granted probably now. There's a lot of extra work that went into that back in the day when we were here, which meant a lot of people had to take a lot of ownership in Redeemer. Teams of people that rotate in and out each week, and so many people who took their turn, just kind of hauling in, hauling out, packing up all the sound stuff in the trailer. Alex Bruce from very early day kind of taking over the utility team. But I think God really used that, by His grace again, to just kind of really forge a community together. There's so many people. It took so many people to make it possible for us to just come together and worship on a Sunday morning. It was really beautiful.
In 2012, it was our first year of marriage, and we were finding out how to do adult life on our own in Bloomington. And with our faith, we felt pretty much on our own and a bit lost as well.
We'd been looking for a church community, and a neighbor invited us to check out Redeemer, who became a great friend, and we've never looked back. We never went anywhere else. We found relevant teaching and encouragement towards faith and a mission mindset that we've continued to hold on to and grow in.
Yeah, it was a pretty incredible community too that we found at Redeemer. We had spent 2 years there with you all, and now we've been in Indianapolis for 3 years, and we tell friends Bloomington made us artsy and green, but God really did some eternal work on us during our time at Redeemer specifically. So we're so grateful to be celebrating year 5 of God's faithfulness to you. as a church, and we miss you dearly.
Love you all.
Banneker served us so well, but by the end of the spring of 2015, we were starting to kind of fill up a couple gatherings there on Sunday mornings at 9 and 11. And really more than that, we were filling up the kids' space. So we really needed to find another space. And my wife had actually been to a yard sale that was held here in this building and kind of snuck around. And she had started praying that the Lord would lead us to get into this space at some point. And right around the spring of 2015, I finally got connected with the pastor, the then pastor of Fairview, who like the first thing she said to me was, would we be interested in their building and using their building in any way? And I was like, well, actually, we might be. And so we started a conversation that kind of started moving in a direction of us possibly moving in here to share the space. And by God's grace and with the gracious provision of Fairview and their church being willing to open their doors to share with us, we were able to kind of move in the summer of 2015 and begin gathering here at 11 each Sunday, and really giving us space to continue to grow and a place where we could have one gathering for everybody. We had lots of great classroom space that we could kind of utilize for our children's ministry to continue just to grow and thrive. And by God's grace, we've been growing since then. In the last 5 years, we've really seen so much grace. I mean, 74 baptisms that we've celebrated thus far. We anticipate celebrating a couple more on our birthday here. And the Lord has just been at work, drawing people to himself, bringing people to saving faith, bringing people into community.
Hi, I'm Tim Sled. I've been coming to Redeemer since June of 2016, and I've been a member since October of 2016. When I moved here, it was the toughest time. It was being surrounded by people who were willing to say, we're all broken. We live in a broken world, but it's Jesus that you need to trust, and it's repentance that you need to do, and the grace is sufficient for you. My testimony is one of provision, despite getting basically taken to the bottom. God's provided for me the whole time, and being able to have people that can point that out to me and show me and encourage me through that's been a dear part of being in this family.
I'm just thankful that the Lord moved in us and allowed us to be a part of what he was doing here in our city. I know that it is no credit to myself or my wife or to the leaders that started the church and the launch team folks who were part of the beginning of the church, but it really is all of grace that the Lord invited us in to just be a part of that and experience that together as a body. And as we look forward, hopefully to much more than just 5 more years, we pray that we would continue just to rest in his grace and know that it is all his doing, that he is at work before we show up. He's at work after we're long gone. He is sovereign over all, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to get to be a part of the work that he's doing in our city and in this church.